This is Tovuti. I'm Michael Kraus, Chief Experience Officer. We're talking about the 5 tips to stay connected. We talked about Moyo. This is our little elephant mascot that represents our culture, and that's also available on our website under careers. You can drill in and look at our culture components, and that's pretty neat. Who am I? I'm Michael Kraus. I took a road to get here in my career, starting out in Navy Intel when I was very young, and then building up through the ranks as an entrepreneur, eventually diving into computer science after a bizarre head injury and pivot in my life, which led me back to Microsoft and software engineering, and then eventually back into executive leadership again, where I would spend some time in state government and federal government, and then back into more of a startup, new tech kind of role for a company where I was the customer experience officer and drove global customer success for a season where I was on the road all the time, traveling to Europe every 4 to 6 weeks, back and forth across the US. And in those times, I was remote in a different way than I'm remote today. Today, I'm remote at home. Then I was remote from Starbucks coffee shops, hoteling spaces at offices and places I was visiting, other corporations and businesses. But it gave me a chance to really experience the full gamut of being an engineer, being an entrepreneur, being a person that solved big problems as an executive, and driving success across different platforms, but also working with incredible brands like Nike, Warner Brothers, and others where world class really has a definition. And I can bring that with me even into Tovuti. And it's been really exciting. And that brought me to Tovuti. All these different experiences led me on my journey and my path to where I am today. So that's who I am. So we're going to start with be intentional. Let's get my notes to the right place real quick here. And I see that people are logged in and accessed. That's awesome. Thank you, Ryan. I love Moyo too. That's fantastic. I love your, I got my chats up here, my Q&A, my attendee list. So in throughout this, I'll try to give some nods out to the crowd, but I appreciate you being here today. We're super excited to talk about this. And again, we're going to start with being intentional. So being intentional, I'm just juggling back and forth on my 3 screens here. But being intentional is so important. You know, it's why we came together. It's why we're meeting. So meeting types are things like status update meetings, information sharing meetings, decision-making meetings, problem-solving meetings, innovation meetings, and team building meetings. So all of these meetings have a purpose, and there's others. This is just kind of a common collection. And it's really important that when we meet, we have a plan, that we have an agenda, that we understand what the outcome should be. Even if it's team building and it's more of a social connection or it's a celebrating sort of call, we can come out and say, hey, you know, we really celebrated. We really built the team, or we really solved some problems. But we should recap that in some kind of a message, whether it's, you know, through a messaging platform like Slack or it's email or a note, to memorialize that, hey, this meeting ended and there was value. And we can track back on that in the future, especially in a business and professional setting. Those can be really important to our progress and growth as we develop as companies and organizations. So the next thing I want to jump into is using tech. So using tech, just like we are today, is really important, and not all tech is appropriate for all settings. So if I wanted to have a one-on-one call, I might use Slack, Google Hangouts, or maybe my FaceTime on my phone, do a video call. So there's ways we can connect on a small scale, and there's ways we connect on a much larger scale. It's like the webinars like this, where there could be thousands of attendees, and it would scale enough and provide enough bandwidth for that larger group. And things in between, where we're having small team meetings and departmental meetings, and we're communicating with clients, staff, and partners. And so the technology should be chosen appropriately to meet those needs. Because if you don't fit those needs, like if I was on FaceTime right now, this would be really difficult. So choosing the right tool is really important. And by choosing the right tool, these guys are sharing a laptop, but by choosing that right tool ensures our success when we're meeting. And so those are really important. And being able to collaborate and even being able to record the communications, especially for teams and for companies and organizations, can be really valuable as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is human to human. I have notes that say change slide. So I'm toggling back and forth trying to change it. Appreciate your patience. So human to human. So on human to human, this is where I think the technology has gone so far. And there's even more than like the webinars today. There's even virtual components, and Zoom is playing around with some of this tech too with some partners, which is really exciting. And even Tovuti is now collaborating with a virtual engineer and domain expert in that field on how we can incorporate virtual experiences into the learning platform, but also in how we communicate and meet. So today you can see, you know, I'm in my office, I'm hanging out at home here, but in the future, I could be standing on a stage. I could be walking on top of my desk. And I've seen some of this technology. It's absolutely incredible. Even to the point with the right gear, we could be sitting at the same table virtually together and see each other and work together in a much more natural setting. And so the human-human component is so important. And I just want to stress that, you know, in these crazy and historic times of pandemic, there's never been a more important time in history for us to be connected because we're so isolated in the quarantine models and things that are happening. And so it gives us a chance to turn our video on, to make eye contact, to share our expressions, and to really communicate in the way we were designed to communicate as human beings. And then another thing is just a side note that was really cool. So about the third or fourth week into the pandemic and the quarantine here, where we're at in Boise, Idaho, I was coming out of a late night work session, and I walked into the kitchen and I saw that my wife had her laptop up, and then I also saw on the screen all the other, our children and their households. There's 4 of them, and they're all dialed into the Tovuti virtual meeting space. And she's whipping up our dinner, and they're all making their dinners at their respective homes. And some were drinking wine, and there was, you know, music going, and it was very refreshing and neat to see that the family was connected, and it was social, and it was personal, and they're sharing their kitchens, and they're sharing their dinner experiences together, even during a time of disconnectedness and isolation. So being human to human, allowing not just audio and screen share, but opening up our offices and our homes. A dog might run by, a kid might come up and say, "Hey, Dad, I need some help." And I love the situations with our clients and team members when they pull their son up on their lap and introduce them and they say hello. I think that we get a chance to be more transparent and more personal now than ever before. And so human to human, it's so important. So the next thing I want to jump into is being present. And being present is so critical. And I know that I struggle with this. If I'm not talking, I'm usually doing 2 things. I'm distracted by whatever I have to do next or whatever I'm missing to be on the call. Sometimes I'm distracted by messages going off and notifications going off or emails popping in because I have all these different things around me during these virtual calls. I'm still plugged in to this sort of cyber experience, and it's easy to get distracted. The other thing that I think is common for a lot of people, I'm going to go ahead and click this because I think that's a really, if you like Parks and Rec, these guys are awesome. But I think the other challenge, at least that I've had, and I think is common for a lot of people, is that as soon as someone starts talking, I have an answer and response in my head, and I'm not paying attention. I'm not actively listening. And so to be an active listener, there's really 5 components that are super important. I'm just going to say these 5 things. We'll move on to the next attribute of the 5 tips. But you want to be in a receiving mode, an understanding mode, an evaluating mode, a remembering mode, and then a responding mode. So we're active, we're curious, we're engaging up here until they've finished their thought and their points they're making, their presentation. Then we respond, and we've taken in all that information, evaluated it, and are participating actively while we're listening. And I'm just going to say that and move on. But those are great things that have helped me. So staying connected, that's part of staying connected. Be present. All right. So our next topic is add value. Add value is so important. I think that it's so easy to just kind of go through the motions. You know, we go through a call, we check a few boxes, and then we're done. And I think that there's an opportunity to add value that sometimes can be missed on calls. And so I have a little story I want to share about a client that we worked with just a few weeks ago. And one of our coaches, Alex, brought a client, Tarika Coney, in. Tarika needed a professional services estimate or quote to build 8 courses for her in the Tovuti platform. And so one of my faults in some respects is I'm just super curious. And so I can burn a lot of time on asking questions and curiosity. And I think it's an important part of conversations. It's part of our actual culture under Moyo. The why is for youthfulness and curiosity. And so I think that by bringing that into our client relationships and our staff and employee relationships, we can be super creative and really add dynamic value to these conversations and meetings. And so for Tarika, I was like, wow, tell me about your business. How does it work? How are you doing it today, right? Because if we don't know what she's doing today, we can't really solve the problem easily on Tovuti. We need that understanding. So back up where we're being present, we're thinking, we're asking questions, we're learning the whole time. So Tarika began to walk us through all these information and process that she does on her current platform. And then she took us into her content because I was like, wow, show me your content. How's your content look today? How do you deliver it? Her content was built on Canva. Canva is a great tool for storing collateral, building presentations. She takes us into her first course, and it's absolutely stunning. I couldn't believe how beautiful her presentations were. And I was blown away by her individual talent and creativity, that she's running a business and this whole learning process and building all this incredible collateral was just blew my mind. So at that point I said, Tarika, can you download that real quick? So she downloaded her presentation out of Canva as a PDF. And I asked her to open Tovuti's instance, go to the admin panel, click on the learning menu. I asked her to open up and click on interactive content. And then I had her click on import presentation, which is at the very top of interactive content. You can't miss it. It's at the very, very top. She clicks on that, grabs her PDF slides from her desktop, imports them, and it says Making Magic. It's super cool. You got to play with it if you haven't. And we open it up. It's all in slides. It looks absolutely beautiful. It's landscape mode. It's beautiful. And we show her how to add a couple interactions to it. And then we go out and we look at it. And guess what? In less than 20 minutes, she created 1 of 8 courses all by herself. And it's beautiful. Some of the best content I've ever seen. So I went back to Tarika and I said, wow, do you think you can do that 7 more times for the remaining courses? And she said, yes. And then I asked her, would you still like to pay thousands of dollars to have a professional services team come in and do that for you? And she said, no way, I got this. And so I think that by coming in and saying, I want to add value to every call, that by being curious, an active listener, being present, and really understanding the goal of the call, we can ensure that there's added value. So that is our 5 tips for the day. And I cruised them really quickly because I'm hoping to have some Q&A. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. You rock too, brother. I love seeing the chats coming through. If you have questions, I would love to move to the questions now. And I just want to say too that I'll grab this last picture here. Yeah, that's a classic right there. But adding value, it's so much fun to have those outcomes in a call. And so I encourage you to practice all of these components. And when you're doing virtual meetings, to stay connected. And just to recap, it's so important to be intentional. It's so important to use the right tech at the right time. H2H, human to human. Always remember, you're meeting with people that are real just like you are. The next thing is to be present, active listening, and then finally add value. And recap all those meetings and share that success of that meeting back with everybody as confirmation and to celebrate. We had a great meeting. This is the outcome. So while I'm waiting for some questions to come in, thank you, Heather. I love that. Heather is also going to be joining us next month's webinar. This is going to happen every month now. Next month will be based on Tovuti's events. Heather Tunison at CAP has just done brilliant things with events with Tovuti. We've enhanced and increased the capabilities of our events feature based on their feedback and other clients. And so don't miss next week's webinar that will host myself, Heather, and possibly some other team members as well as we talk about events. We'll love to see you there. We'll get information out. This will be recorded as well. So you'll have opportunities to be able to share this with colleagues and review it at a different time when it's more convenient. I've got a question here. How do you recommend connection various teams in a company virtually to do things like cross-share information, best practices, culture? Oh, I love that, Ryan. I love that. I think that it's so important today that you are intentional with those kinds of things. And if you're driving culture in teams, I think that there's a hierarchy, like you need to drive culture from the top. But I think as teams, you need to meet regularly and you need to have video. I think video is so important and underutilized. Calling in and checking it that way is just not human to human. It's hard to be present. But if you can see people's expressions and interactions, so empower your teams, make sure they have the equipment and tools they need to have those face-to-face virtual conversations. And thank you, Ryan, for sharing that. That was a great question. Let's see. Thank you, Isaiah. Good point on chats. Appreciate it. Any other questions? We've got just a few more minutes, and I don't want to miss anything that anybody has. Great input so far. And I think that there's not a lot of detail on the slides, but if somebody was interested, I can work with the team to see if we can pop those out there and possibly share the notes as well. If that's of interest, we can format those for everybody and check on that. That's a good question. Thank you. Awesome. Appreciate it. All right. I don't see any more questions coming in right now. I'm going to give it one more minute, and then we'll wrap things up and we'll get these links out for everybody, and we'll keep you posted on next month's webinar as well. If anybody has stories or success stories they want to share and maybe participate in a future webinar or a highlight of a client and feature, please shoot emails to me and let me know those stories, because I would love to see that. Oh, great question. Question about my beard. It changes. It's actually my small beard right now. If those of you that were on calls with me like in the last month would have seen a much larger beard. My beard changes through the seasons, and it's well groomed. And my wife has a lot of power in helping me keep this beast under control. But thanks for asking about my beard. All right. Well, I think we're at a wrap right now. I appreciate every one of you, and I appreciate your time. And we'll get all this information back out to you so you can share it and review it. And we'll see you next month. Thank you so much. Oh, I got a last minute question. Let's see on these. Okay, so the question is, how important do you consider it on from home meetings to be real about the situation, like mentioning your dog sleeping? I love that question. Thank you, Isaiah. I think it's so important, and I think it's okay. I'll let people know. I've got a dog under my feet right now. She's a 15-year-old Shih Tzu. Sometimes she has nightmares and she cries. Sometimes she jumps up and barks for no reason. And so it's real. And I think that exposing who we are and a little bit about our situations and our lives is a great way for that human to human. And in order to be present, we need to be aware of that. And I think that sometimes we try to hide, and I love the virtual backgrounds. One of our clients has a Star Trek, like the main helm, and it's super awesome. But I think that it's okay to share a little bit more of ourselves, be a little more transparent to connect. It's a great question, Isaiah. I appreciate it. All right. Well, that's a wrap. We'll go ahead and we'll stop the broadcast, and we'll catch up with all of you next month. Thank you.